Blog Talk Radio.
Paranormal Review Radio.
Hello and welcome, everyone. It's Friday night, and you're listening to Paranormal Review Radio with your hosts, Anthony Agati in New York.
And me, Lucy Liebfried from Chicago. What a great show we have for you tonight. Our chat room is up and running, so feel free to ask us any questions. If you lose sound on your player, just refresh your page or log back in. Blog Talk can be a little testy sometimes, and you can also send us an email at paranormalreviewradio@yahoo.com, and be sure you check us out on our Facebook page.
I want to start off by reading you a quote from Eric von Daniken's book, Chariots of the Gods. If we want to set out on the arduous search for the truth, we must all summon up the courage to leave the lines along which we have thought until now, and as the first step, begin to doubt everything that we previously accepted as correct and true. After spending more than 25 years as an engineering consultant for some of the major aerospace companies, our guest tonight has searched for the truth beyond the boundaries that many scientists have created. Mike Bara is a New York Times best-selling author and lecturer. A self-described born-again conspiracy theorist, Mike Bara has written some amazing books. His first, Dark Mission, The Secret History of NASA, which was co-authored with the infamous Richard C. Hoagland, has been described as astonishing, compelling, and an enlightening piece of work. Mike's second book, The Choice, peels back the layers of mystery around the Mayan calendar, 2012, and the future we can expect if we don't heed nature's warning signs. And now Mike has written a new book entitled Ancient Aliens on the Moon, which has been both eye-opening and controversial amongst many of his peers. Mike is also a frequent contributor for the History Channel's Ancient Aliens and America's Book of Secrets, which happen to be one of mine and Lucy's favorite shows. In any case, Mike Bara is not afraid to delve deeper into what he believes to be the real truth about the Earth, Moon, and the connection they have. Please welcome one of my favorite authors, Mr. Mike Bara. Hey, Mike, how are you tonight?
Good. I didn't realize Richard was infamous.
In my book, he is.
When did he go from venerable to infamous?
Is he listening? I think he is, maybe.
Well,
okay.
Mike, welcome
I guess we
to
have
the
a difference
show.
of opinion on that. Thank you.
Oh, welcome. It's great to have you on. You know, as Anthony just mentioned, you've co-authored your first book, Dark Mission, with Richard C. Hoagland, and then transformed into your second book, The Choice, which is absolutely mind-blowing. And now you've written a new and exciting book called Ancient Aliens on the Moon. So how did you come to write this book? Does it have something to do with your role on the History Channel show Ancient Aliens?
Yeah, actually, you know, what I discovered in the process of doing the show is that there's a whole universe out there of younger people who, you know, get most of their information not from books and terrestrial radio and the old-fashioned methods, but from you know, from YouTube and from television. And many of them had never heard of anything along the lines of what Richard Hoagland had written about, what Eric von Daniken had written about. They were aware of some of the stuff from the Ancient Aliens program about ruins on the Earth and some of the controversies around, you know, whether they were built by aliens or whether we had help building them. Excuse me. And they knew nothing about the presence of extraterrestrial artifacts, alien artifacts, on the Moon or on Mars. So I thought, well, you know, I think this is time for another book on the subject, a short, concise one that just focuses on the ancient alien aspect, the ruins aspect, rather than in Dark Mission, where we got heavily into the politics of science and the conspiracy behind what the ultimate the ultimate motivations may be for covering things up that the NASA may have found out there. So I thought, hey, the time is right, the audience is there, and they're craving this kind of information, and they don't get enough of it. So I thought it was a good idea to go back to the basics, go back to the artifacts, and start talking about that stuff again.
Okay. Well, you know what? You do call yourself a conspiracy theorist, but one theory that you do not agree with is that there have been fake moon landings. Can you tell us why is this?
Well, just because, from an engineering standpoint, that so many of the claims that I read that people made arguing that this was proof that we never went to the moon simply weren't valid. And, there were any number of things from, we wouldn't be able to survive the radiation in the radiation belt, which is not correct. Some of the claims about the photography were simply not correct. There were claims that the astronauts couldn't possibly have gotten out of the hatch of the lunar module, which is not true. That the lunar rover would never have fit in the lunar module, that's not true. So, just a lot of stuff like that. And really what motivated me was I heard a debate between the infamous Richard C. Hoagland and a guy named James Collier on Coast to Coast AM one night on the radio. And this guy Collier just didn't know what he was talking about. And, as I dug into these claims, especially about the shadows and things like that, it just became really obvious to me that it was not a good conspiracy theory. And, on top of that, one of the things that we wrote about in Dark Mission was the fact that the people who really started this rumor, way back before Buzz and Neil had even splashed down, were the guys at NASA. They were the ones who were helping push this idea out there. And I think that it is a kind of a cultural meme that was put out into the ether with the idea that if anybody ever started snooping around about what NASA really had done or hadn't done or had covered up, that they would run into this thing and they would believe that that was the reason for all of the secrecy and the very strange choices and decisions that were made at times by NASA. And then once that conspiracy theory, which is so easily debunked, was debunked, nobody would believe any other conspiracy theories about NASA. So it was kind of a conspiracy within a conspiracy. And, so then again, it goes in, there's all kinds of technical reasons, there's all kinds of philosophical reasons. And the other thing is that, I think it was put the best by I think it was Charlie Duke, who said, one of the fellow astronauts, who said, if we were going to fake going to the moon, we went to the moon 9 times. Why would we fake it 9 times? Wouldn't we just fake it once or twice and then stop going? So to me, that was the best logic behind it. And I just really have never seen anything. To me, it also adds up to 9/11. It equates to the 9/11 conspiracies. I've never seen anything from a technical standpoint that convinces me of any reality other than the fact that, as South Park put it, a bunch of pissed off Muslims flew airplanes in the buildings on 9/11. So to me, I'm willing to buy a conspiracy theory as long as I feel like there's some solid evidence behind it and to support it, then I'll go with it. But I guess I'm selective about my conspiracies.
Well, Mike, you've dedicated this book to Eric von Däniken, Zachariah Sitchin, and the infamous Richard C. Hoagland. Why these 3 gentlemen?
Well, because the truth is there really wouldn't be any investigation of ancient aliens, period, or ancient aliens anywhere but on the Earth without one of these 3 guys. I mean, really, von Däniken was the first guy with Chariots of the Gods to suggest that a lot of these ancient myths and mysteries, had possibly or probably had their roots in an observable reality of a true history that the ancients were writing down and recording. And, that he was the first one to really put this idea out there that, hey, if you look at some of these carvings and paintings, they appear to be depicting airplanes, spacecraft, and even human beings operating very complex rockets and equipment of that nature. So he was one of the first people that really brought this out. Excuse me. I'm a little under the weather here. And as such, he deserves a lot of credit for being the first guy to have brought this idea to the forefront. Now, regardless of the fact that Eric made some mistakes along the way, I think he did a credible job of raising the ancient alien question in the first place. And then you have Zecharia Sitchin, who, did a lot of interpretations of the ancient Sumerian texts, and with works like the 12th Planet, really brought it into a whole different level and began to say, look, if you look at the actual origins of man, it appears that, according to what the Sumerians say, that we are actually, our bodies are cobbled together from the DNA of ourselves and some other species on the planet, probably Neanderthal man, and we came from the stars in essence. And I think that's a really powerful, compelling argument. I think the genetics pretty much back up Sitchin at this point. So, to me that was fascinating. And then Richard was the first one to say, hey, anything you find on Earth, you can make, or you're going to get an argument to the effect that men could have built this. They could have found some way to build it. And even though a lot of the explanations for how the pyramids were built is somewhat preposterous, theoretically it's possible human beings could have built them and not aliens. But if you can find artifacts on another planet in the solar system, on the moon or on Mars or Venus or some other place, then guess what? You pretty much have absolute proof that there has been alien visitation of our planet at some point in the past. So to me, those three guys are like the holy trinity of the whole ancient alien theory, because it wouldn't really exist without the three of them, or even without any one of them, I don't think, at least not in a consistent, coherent way that it seems to exist today.
Well, before we get into talking about the artifacts on the moon, which is described in your book, we should talk about pretty much how did the moon form. I've read that the moon is pretty much made up of the same materials found here on Earth. So, what are the theories on how the moon was actually created?
Well, the first theory that was put out there is, I think, ultimately the best one, which is the fission theory, the idea that somehow the moon was actually spun off from the Earth at some point in the primordial past and established a stable orbit around the Earth. And that was, kind of discredited because people argued that there wasn't sufficient angular momentum within the system to account for the amount of energy that it would have taken to spew, the moon out. I think that's an interesting argument, but to me it's a very weak leg to stand on if you're saying the fission theory didn't happen. The other theories that were really popular for a while was the accretion model, and the accretion model basically says that clumps of matter just started sort of sticking together magically, and one of them was in the orbit of the Earth, and one of them was in the orbit of the moon, and slowly but surely over time they just sort of swept away the protostellar nebula and cleaned it up like a vacuum cleaner, and slowly but surely accreted themselves into these big balls. But again, if that were the case, then the odds are that the moon and the Earth would be made up of significantly different materials, and they're not. It appears, as a matter of fact, that the moon is made from the same stuff as the Earth. In fact, it's made from the light mantle, the outer shell of the Earth. So right. Then the prevailing theory became the big whack theory, which is the idea that a Mars-sized object hit the Earth, and that material from that Mars-sized object and the moon and the Earth were cobbled together to form the moon. And it was interesting. I just watched a show yesterday, one of these how the universe works kind of things, and they showed this theory and just acted like it was all proven. But recently there's been some findings on titanium oxygen isotopes that basically say that that's not the case, because again you would have some sort of materials that would have been foreign to the Earth, because they would have come from this other body that would have formed elsewhere in the solar system, would have a different chemical composition than the Earth. So those two theories, the accretion model and the big whack theory, really don't work. And so the thing that we're left with is the fission model. And the only thing we really have to explain at this point is the angular momentum. And I'm not sure that we have a good explanation for that at that point, but there is a theory that was put forth by Dr. Tom Van Flandern, the late Dr. Tom Van Flandern, in his book, Dark Matter, Missing Planets, and New Comets. where he talked about the solar fission theory of planetary formation. And I talked about this, I think, pretty extensively in The Choice, my second book, where basically he argues that all the planets are spun off from the sun, that the sun, as it forms and it is very massive and spinning very, very rapidly, spins off other planets, and he has kind of a system that he calculated out, and it all seems to pretty well fit with how the solar system looks at this point, minus a couple of missing planets. And one of the things it says is that the inner rocky terrestrial planets, like the Earth and Venus, are going to spew off as opposed to the big gas giants will spew off, 9 or 10 or a dozen smaller moons, whereas the rocky internal terrestrial planets, the inner solar system planets, will spew off one big moon. And that's kind of the situation that we have. And so it fits Van Flander's theory, and it's really a shame he's not alive to have studied these new reports, because he would probably be out there very strongly advocating for the fission theory of lunar formation, which is the one I ascribe to. We just have to kind of figure out where the angular momentum is. And the angular momentum, again, is kind of a complex term. It basically just means the spin energy of the planet.
Okay. Well, Mike, in your previous book, The Choice, you wrote, without the moon's calming influence, the Earth would spin so fast that the centrifugal force would most likely flatten us all like pancakes. So how significant is the moon to the survival of our planet?
Well, the moon is really significant to the survival of the Earth, because one of the things that it does is it stimulates the magnetic field, the creation of the Earth's magnetic field, which is what protects us from the harmful radioactive particles that the sun is always spewing out. So really, the truth is we couldn't have life on Earth without the influence of the moon to stimulate the dynamo, as they call it, or at least that's one of the theories of how magnetic fields are formed. So that would be really important. It also sort of burned away a lot of the angular momentum, the spin energy that the Earth had, and slowed our days down so that they became a 24-hour period instead of just like a 6-hour period, which it probably was very, very early in the Earth's formation. And if the Earth had continued to spin too fast, you would have a situation where if you even had an atmosphere forming, you would basically have such wild, intense winds and storms that everything would be almost flattened by those winds. It would be a crazy environment. It wouldn't be any place that you could really, not only would Mars not be a place to raise your kids, but the Earth would be no place to raise your kids either. So without the moon, it's safe to say that advanced life on Earth simply would not exist. And to me, again, that goes back and argues the moon has been here for a long time and has been a big part of the stabilization process that was necessary for the Earth to support life.
Okay. You do make a great point in your book that the word lunatic comes from the word lunar, which directly connects the moon with a person's energies and feelings. Now, I know this is not something that scientists believe in, but how much does the moon affect us mentally and physically?
Well, I'd argue tremendously. I mean, there's a lot of things scientists don't believe in. There's a lot of things they do believe in. For instance, they believe that basically 70% of all the stuff, all the matter in the universe is out there. It's just invisible and undetectable. So to me, scientists believe a lot of silly things, and they disbelieve a lot of things that are probably valid. Let me give you just an example of how the alignments of planets and the moon and its influence can affect people's consciousness. The other night around this house, I'm staying in Seattle at the moment. I'm staying with my brother, and there's about 9 animals. There's 3 dogs and 5 cats, and there's 8 animals. And they were all just going nuts about a week ago, 10 days ago. They were just all at night. It was just crazy. They were all just running around, and somebody said, my sister-in-law said, "What the heck, is it a full moon?" And I went outside, and I'm like, "Yeah, it's a full moon." So, look, all you got to do is ask anybody. Ask any bartender, any waitress, anybody who works at a bar, or any place like that, if the full moon has an effect, and everybody will tell you yes, that people act strangely. And again, that's one of the big components of The Choice, is the idea that planetary alignment and influences absolutely do have some control and some effect on our consciousness here on Earth and the kinds of things we experience. And the fact that, you know, a lunatic is somebody who behaves a little bit crazy is absolutely related to the full moon. So it's, you know, it's just one of these things that people have known intuitively for thousands of years, and that science, you know, has just got to do some catching up on.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, you know, Mike, this whole subject is really relatively new to me, and reading your book was really a revelation in many ways. And one of the first things that I thought about was how there are so many photos of the surface of the moon, and many of these photos are from space probes and missions that were both manned and not. So how could evidence of alien civilizations not be detected in any of the many images of the moon until recently?
Well, I think it actually was detected. In fact, I think you could actually make an argument that, you know, NASA, before they ever landed, had a pretty good idea where the good stuff was and where it wasn't, and had a plan for looking some of this stuff up. So the question is, what do they know and when do they know it? This stuff, there have been stuff, people all the way back to the late, middle 1970s, when books started coming out. I think there was one called Somebody Else Is on the Moon, and We Found Alien Bases on the Moon, and they weren't really very good books, but they were people that were looking at stuff on NASA photographs, and they were finding really unusual things that they were having a hard time explaining. It looked to them like some sort of construction or some sort of mining process was going on. That was a big popular one on the moon, and I think it was George Leonard who wrote Somebody Else Is on the Moon, which was the classic early work in this area.
Right.
One of the things I found the most fascinating in that book was that Farouk El-Baz, who was the lead geologist, you know, in NASA, who was the guy that had tremendous influence over the selection of landing sites and so forth, actually, when Leonard wrote him a letter and sent him pictures and said, I'm finding these things on the moon, he actually sat down and had lunch with Leonard in the early 1970s and said, I want to see what you have found. And to me, that's an indication that El-Baz, you know, knew very well and had seen plenty of things on the moon that were artificial, but he just wanted to know what Leonard knew. He wanted to know how exposed they were on some of the stuff, because I think there was definitely a policy of at least, if not cover-up, at least don't ask and don't tell. So, you know, to me, this stuff has been found. It has been spotted. You can go all the way back to the Blair Cuspids controversy back in 1965 from the Lunar orbiter photograph, where you know, a professor was arguing that, hey, there's these objects that appear to be sticking straight up, and they look like they're very, very tall obelisk-type features, and they look to me like they might be artificial because they have alignments with each other that are mathematically consistent, and they're casting these long shadows, and you know, by definition on the moon, which it has no atmosphere and it's been beaten down by eons of meteor bombardment, there can't be anything 70 feet tall or 100 feet tall sticking straight up out of the ground. You just can't have formations like that. Everything should be smooth and rounded and beaten down. So from the very beginning, I guess I don't accept the premise of your question. From the very beginning, there were questions. From the very beginning, there were people that were spotting things. But, you know, it has become more interesting to people in more recent times, because you've had the ability to really get access to the archives, and you've had the democratizing power of the internet and video and TV and, you know, home video and things like that to get the information out there. I mean, back in as late as the 70s or early 80s, if you couldn't talk somebody, you know, into putting you on a TV special on one of the three major networks, your information simply didn't get out. So, you know, you could write a book and good luck getting a major publisher to publish it, that kind of thing. So just
right.
You now have this ability. You have this ability now to get this stuff out, and people are finding these things all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Is it really true that our moon is the only moon in the solar system that actually orbits the sun rather than its parent planet?
It's a really weird situation. And Isaac Asimov, the very famous science fiction writer, did a calculation, and what he basically said is, if you look at the the push-pull of everything, then in essence, what the moon does is it's always, in its orbit, it's always falling towards the sun. So even though it's in a sort of a stable orbit around the Earth, it's actually in an orbit around the sun first and the Earth second. Now, as far as I know, that's never been refuted, and that's what Asimov said, and Asimov was certainly no dummy. So if that was the case, it would certainly be a unique circumstance, because in every other satellite that he looked at, major satellite of the solar system, at some point in their orbit, their parent had a greater influence on them than the sun did. But the moon, in the case of the moon, he made an exception. That's one of the reasons why he referred to the Earth and the moon as a double planet. And interestingly, he didn't call it a double planet system, which would be a solar system with two planets. What he called it was a double planet. And again, meaning that you had two planets in the same orbit, orbiting the sun. And, I just found that fascinating. That was one of the little factoids I found out as I was doing research and writing the book last spring. I was just like, wow, I never really was aware of that, and you would think that would be something that would be, talked about more commonly. But maybe it's just one of those things that makes everybody a little too uncomfortable. They don't want to talk about it. I don't know that I could say it has tremendous significance, but it is interesting.
Now, you've come under criticism both from NASA and from the public about your theories. Why does there seem to be such a reaction to you in the book? Is this still part of NASA keeping information from the public?
Well, there's a couple things. First of all, I did an interview with somebody else about a month ago, and I talked to somebody who's a very prominent writer in this field. He was the one who was helping with the interview, and we talked about that. And what you have is a situation where, because of the Internet, there's the blessings and the curse of the Internet. And part of the curse is that everybody thinks that they should be the important guy. And if they begin to get the feeling that you're important or more important than them, and they don't think that should be the case, then you kind of have an enemy for life. So I've sort of developed these cyber stalkers. And, again, am I important? I don't know. I guess I take this as it flatters me that I've got people that hate me enough that they want to follow every single thing I do and criticize everything I do and literally take a statement from one source and a statement from another source that are maybe even sometimes 2 years apart and splice them together to make it look like something I said something I never said, and then I'm supposed to defend that thing that I never said. And so you got kind of two aspects of this. You just got people that are just a little jealous, and that's okay. I mean, we're all human. I get jealous of people too. There's people I wish I was, just as famous as. But it's human nature. But then you've also got the sort of the debunking, the cottage industry of debunking, which is backed by people who wouldn't really probably have time to even do this if they weren't being funded by NASA, and who have these sort of secondary careers of attacking anybody who questions any of the established orthodoxies of the Church of the great God NASA. So these people have a professional vested financial interest in making sure that there's no competition to what NASA is saying is the truth. And their game is basically to keep accusing you of one thing or another, of consistently attacking this little fact or that little fact, no matter how immaterial or how unimportant, and making you constantly defend yourself, because, of course, when they do that, then you don't have time to create or write anything new. So it's a situation where you got to expect criticism. I mean, if you're going to challenge the established church, which is in essence what NASA is, NASA is sort of scientific establishment. They're the new church. It's ironic that they were the ones persecuted by the Catholics, and now they persecute their own heretics. People would say, hey, I don't think you're right about that. So you've got these two aspects to it, and part of it goes with the territory, and part of it is just, I guess, flattering in a way, because if somebody who's backed by NASA is worried enough about you that they want to try to tear you down, then I guess that must mean you're doing some work that's important. And all you can do in the end is, pick and choose your shots, pick and choose what things you're going to stand up against and what you're going to defend, and the rest of it you just kind of got to let it go, because if you're a public person and you put your truth out there for people to believe or not believe, you just kind of have to stand in that truth and say, okay, I'm not going to respond to every person who wants to call me a name or attack my work. And, it's been very intense the last 3 or 4 months before this book came out and when the book came out. Very intense, very personal, very dirty, very underhanded, and just very unpleasant. But it's like, okay, if I didn't want this attention, I don't have to write any more books or be on any more TV shows, do I?
Right. Well, we did a show maybe about 6 or 7 months ago about government and NASA UFO cover-ups, and I can't figure out why. I mean, I can, but I'd love to hear your opinion on this. Why do you think NASA is so afraid to reveal, all these things that you and others that are like you are coming forward and bringing to the public? What are they afraid of?
Well, first of all, it's at a much, much higher level than NASA. NASA's not the one making the decision. They're simply implementing the policies that are made at a much higher political level than NASA's. So the reason is stated very clearly in the Brookings report. Back in, at the time NASA was formed in 1958, they commissioned a study that, among other things, was to look at what do we do if we find something or we encounter aliens while we're out there visiting the moon or visiting Mars, or, at that time they thought they might be able to visit Venus. What do we do? And the report came back with a lot of different recommendations, and among them was you should give serious consideration to the idea of not telling people. And the reason for that was that if you look at the history of cultures that thought that they were the top of the heap, and then encountered a superior culture, a culture that was technologically superior to them, they collapsed and dissolved and fell apart. And it warned very, very specifically that this exact same thing could happen to our own culture if we were suddenly confronted without proper, adequate preparation with the idea of a superior ancient, a superior alien civilization. So we were cautioned. It said that the War of the Worlds broadcast was a prime example of what might happen if we were suddenly confronted with this reality. And the interesting thing was is that it said that the scientists and the engineers, the people who most closely associate their personal value, their own personal self-esteem, I guess, with mastery of nature, would be the ones that would be the most shattered by it. So it's interesting because basically what it's saying is the people, the rank and file that work for NASA would be the most freaked out by this and would probably have the most devastating emotional effect. So in essence, I think that they view it as kind of a political duty. I mean, I really think that study was designed to help them form policy about what are we going to do. So again, any decision to reveal anything is not going to be made by NASA. It's going to be executed by NASA, but made at much higher levels than them. And I think the policy is just, look, it's too big of a risk to our civilization to have any kind of disclosure. That's why, these other UFO researchers that believe in disclosure, I just think that I just kind of laugh at them. I don't think it's ever going to happen because, unless you have an idea of what we're going to replace the economy with, you're not going to go forward with something like that. And why would people at the top of the heap who are running the show, why would they want to reveal this information? Because if they did, the only direction they can go at that point is down. They can't get any more powerful. They can only lose power and lose status. And it doesn't seem to me that that's a very likely thing that political leaders are going to do. I mean, political leaders like to be in power, I think.
So, Mike, actually, because you did state that the Brookings report was to provide legal and political cover for NASA. So, is this the case?
Well, yeah, because here's the thing: if eventually there were some sort of revelation or something happened that was so obvious and out of control, for instance, if we had the proverbial landing on the White House lawn, right, that could not be denied by anybody. And then people said, well, what about all these crazy guys that have been saying that NASA found stuff on the moon way, way back, and what if then some of the astronauts came out and said, yeah, it's true, we saw stuff there, and that kind of thing. And NASA was kind of put on the spot. What they could say is, look, we did this study. It told us if we reveal the truth, everybody will go crazy, and we did this to protect our culture and protect our society. We were doing our duty for our country and for our planet by not telling you about this. At the same time, we left enough information out there so that anybody who was truly curious could go out and find the information for themselves. So to me, that's the way I looked at it. I'm not saying that they I mean, what I'm saying is that they need that legal and political cover so they can always have that answer to why didn't you tell us the truth. I mean, if you're doing it for the goodness of all humanity, for the benefit of all humanity, it's really hard to criticize a choice like that.
Okay. So how is it you came to find stuff that NASA has not? Is this part of could it be that they've already found this evidence too and just never revealed it to the public?
Yeah, that's what I think. I mean, I don't think we've found anything NASA doesn't already know about for the most part. I think that they study these images the same way that we do. And, I think my experience has been when it's something really, really obvious that would basically be a holy grail, they do what they can to cover it up. But they are lazy about it. They're sloppy about it. I think there's so much stuff all over Mars and all over the moon that it's basically impossible to get it all. And I think they also assume, and they're probably correct, that only a certain percentage of the population is going to buy into this. And nobody beyond that is ever going to buy into it until somebody in authority, like the president or like NASA, tells them that it's true. I mean, we really have two different kinds of people in this culture, in my opinion. Those that are what I call authority figure driven, and those that are information driven. Now, I look at myself as somebody who's driven by information. I'm not a conspiracy theorist because somebody told me to be. I am because of my experience and because of seeing things and noticing things that do not fit together, that I felt clearly were lies, that clearly were covered up. And I'm driven by the information. And with the information, what my own eyes and what my own brain is telling me is that there's artificial structures, all over the moon. There's evidence of ancient aliens on the moon. Other people will not believe that unless somebody in authority tells them that is the case. No matter what you put in front of them, they're not going to believe it until they hear it on CNN. I think that the best quote ever on this was Gene Roddenberry to the infamous Richard C. Hoagland, when Richard was giving him a briefing about the face on Mars. And Roddenberry said to him, but Dick, if the face on Mars was real, it would be on television. So that's the truth. To me, that's the truth. And so it's like, again, I can't break through that mentality. I don't know what I don't want to get too much into anybody's political persuasions here, but I remember at one time having a discussion with a friend of my ex-wife, and she was telling me who she was going to vote for and why, and she was going to vote for Clinton. And I said, so I got to ask you this question. Right, you don't mind tax increases and all that. So what you're basically saying, and I try to nail it down, what you were basically saying is you think that Bill Clinton knows better how to spend your money than you do. And she said, yes. And I said, okay, I have nothing more to say to you if that's what you think. And I think that's just an analogy of of the kind of a big chunk, a big majority of the population out there. They just, until somebody, Walter Cronkite or whoever it used to be, until they tell them, okay, you can believe in this now, they're just not going to believe it.
Well, Mike, let's get into some of the artifacts and structures on the moon. Now, I believe and agree with almost everything that you've written and spoken about on ancient aliens on the moon. But do you think that many of the anomalies and artifacts that are on the moon could possibly just be something that was naturally created?
Well, I really don't, and again, it's because of the geologic model of the moon, which is that the moon is this rock, and however it got there, whether it was accretion, whether it was fission, whether it was the big whack, however it got there, it's basically just been beaten down and bombarded by meteors for billions upon billions upon billions, to quote Carl Sagan, of years, billions and billions and billions of years. Everything that's on the surface of the moon should pretty much be a result of that process. And what you're going to get is you're going to get these soft, rounded hills. You're going to get heavy dust everywhere. You're going to get craters. You're not going to get sharp angular structures. You're not going to get anything at right angles. You're not going to get layered structures that look like condos. You're not going to get massive glass scaffolding types of structures over the horizon. You're not going to get pyramids. You're not going to get the kinds of shapes that we see in a lot of these images. And you're not going to get what look like factories and roads and vehicles and all kinds of bizarre things that have been found on the moon. So I just have to tell you, I don't think there's much chance that most of the stuff we've identified is natural. It just doesn't. To me, it looks like architecture or engineering. And, I think to most people who have some knowledge of those two disciplines would probably agree with that.
I mean, I agree with you 100%. I don't think it could be naturally created. It's just, they're too structured. They're too precise to have been naturally created. But there are structures that appear to be ancient ruins to me from pictures that I've seen. But then there are more modern-looking shapes, such as a satellite dish. Is it possible that the moon has been active up until now, up until recently?
Well, I think so, and it's, again, this is really pretty interesting because it looks, I agree with you, it looks like there was some ancient, and by ancient I mean at least millions and millions of years ago, habitation of the planet. The moon has, I think, been artificially modified to a massive extent. There's probably been various epochs of presences on the moon. In other words, you might have had aliens from far away that were here and built some stuff. You may have had aliens that came after that and built some more stuff. You may have had the Anunnaki, Sitchin's Anunnaki may have come here. And you also got to go back to my second book, The Choice, and, where I talk about the Hopi Indians and their belief that we're in the fourth world of man. There have been 3 previous worlds, and they talk about the third world, which was the previous one to this one, which was even more advanced in many ways technologically than we are now. And so a lot of this architecture that I look at, it looks human. It looks like stuff that we would build. It makes sense to me from a design standpoint in terms of it being human architecture. So I wonder if some of it isn't, only as recently as a few thousand years ago, 10, 12, 13, 26,000 years ago, a prior version of humanity which advanced very, very high before it fell and built some of this stuff. And then, of course, you've got the whole secret space program crowd who swear that there are active current space on the lunar surface, and they may well be right, because some of this stuff may actually be modern, to the point of right up to yesterday. I know some people. I know someone who's a friend of mine whose name I'm not allowed to mention, but his dad worked at a major defense contractor in the 60s, and he swears up and down, that he sat in the pool in his dad's backyard at the age of 8 or 9 years old, and people like Edgar Mitchell and Gus Grissom and Gordon Cooper were regular visitors to his barbecues, and he heard them talk about, Grissom especially, about how they were just spamming a can, and there was a real secret program that had all the good technology, and that we'd been to the moon and Mars and back and forth over and over again, and they were just trotting them out for a public show. So there is that crowd that does believe that, and, I do know someone who, I believe that guy's telling me the truth when he tells me those stories. So certainly some of the astronauts apparently believe that there was a secret space program that might have been actively visiting the moon even as we speak.
Well, you talk about these domes on the moon in your book. What are they, and Why were they made?
Well, it depends on which kind of dome you're talking about. Now, it's kind of I couldn't come up with a better name than a glass dome, but
right.
When you think of a dome, typically you think of kind of a watch crystal shape. In other words, the kind of thing that goes over a watch. It's kind of got a shape to it. It's one solid piece. It's one solid piece. But the other aspect of the glass domes that we talked about, that Hoagie's talked about, and that I've looked at, are these gigantic scaffolding types of structures. They have, vertical spires that go up. There's stuff sticking out at right angles to that. There's box-like shapes. There's all this interlocking, multi-layered scaffolding kind of structure, which I also refer to as a dome, which is actually in some cases 10 or 20 miles high above the lunar surface. And one of the conclusions I came to, and it was interesting because I was just with the infamous Richard C. Hoagland in L.A. this past weekend, and we were talking, and he said, it never occurred to me that the scaffolding stuff was a meteor shield before. I was like, really? Because what else would it be? Because this, glass in a lunar environment without moisture is actually about twice as strong as steel. And it would be the perfect material to build if you built it high enough and, with enough multi-layers, it would basically act as a gigantic meteor shield, and then you could put the typical dome, the watch crystal kind of dome, over depression, craters, for instance, and build enclosed habitats underneath that, and they would be fairly well protected, given at least probably the level of protection that our own atmosphere does from meteorite bombardment. So, to me, that's what they are. I think it used to be, Richard's early ideas were that these large structures sticking up in the sky were actually, inhabited, that they may have been areas where there was actually activity going on, aliens or whoever you want to say. But I think mostly that stuff is just the beaten down remnants of what was a really vast meteor shield built on the moon. And whatever they were doing there on the moon must have been quite incredible if that's true, because the extent of these structures over the surface is really quite phenomenal. So there must have been, whatever operation was taking place on our moon, it was a big deal.
Well, Mike, you just mentioned the towers and the spires. Back in 1966, there were a series of images that were released by NASA from the Lunar Orbiter 2. Have there been any more detailed or closer pictures to actually look at those towers or spires?
Yeah, these are the Blair Cuspids we talked about a little bit earlier, and there have been some new pictures from Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter taken of them, and they do appear to just be kind of your typical average boulders. Now, first of all, I got to tell you, I don't trust anything digital from NASA anymore. I just don't at this point. I've seen too many issues with them. But in looking at them, it does appear that what caused the very, very long shadows that gave the illusion of them being these tall, 70-foot, 80-foot, 100-foot towers was the fact that the ground seems to slope off below that and sort of extend the shadows. And that's also part of the controversy about whether we really went to the moon or not. That's another aspect of that controversy, which is the idea that the reason shadows are really long or going in different directions in pictures on the moon is because you've got ground that slopes off in one direction or another and extends the shadow.
Right.
So it does appear that those, in that case, are boulders that would be pretty tall, pretty big, but not 70-foot or 100-foot high or 500-foot high obelisks, which is what they were thought to be from in the early days from the Lunar Orbiter 2 photographs. In fact, I think I was doing some research for my presentation this last week at the Conscious Life Expo in Los Angeles, and I found a Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter picture of Surveyor 6 on the surface of the moon, because I was going to talk about some images Surveyor 6 took. And the shadow for Surveyor 6 was really long. It looked like it was about 50 or 60 feet long. So it made it look as though Surveyor 6 was really tall, but it was simply the sun angle, and in fact, and probably there was a deep slope off to the right. And in fact, Surveyor 6 is only I want to say about 10 feet. The mast was only about 8 or 10 feet up in the air. It wasn't really very tall at all. So you can get optical illusions on some of that stuff.
Okay. So there are quite a few interesting photos in this book now. And the one that I think that I'm most curious about is the robot mask. Do we know what this is?
Well, do we know what this is? I don't know what it is because I don't have it in my hands, and I don't know if they brought it back or not. But it looks like the head of a robot to me. And the thing is, whenever you look at any artifact, whenever I find anything, the first thing I want to do is look around in the area and see if I see anything else that looks artificial, because artificial stuff is typically not isolated. You can have circumstances, especially, for instance, on Mars, you could have circumstances where something, for instance, could be eroded and to the point where it might look a little bit like a human face. But if that was not then surrounded by, as a, for instance, a pentagonal pyramid that was symmetrical about two different, bilaterally symmetrical about two different axes, and a bunch of other pyramidal objects, then you probably would say, well, it's just a trick of light and shadow, and it's not really anything, artificial. But in the case of that robot's head in Shorty Crater, in the crater itself, there's all kinds of stuff which is supposed to be rocks that actually has a mechanical look to it. It appears to have a metallic sheen. They have vents. There are things that look familiar to me as clevises and clamps. There are objects that look like they have some sort of tubing on them. And all of this stuff is sort of vitrified and fossilized, but it's all over the crater as if whatever hit the crater and tossed this stuff up into the air broke all of this machinery apart and then redistributed it down the floor of the crater. And then there's this object itself, and it is about the right size, the same size as a human head. It has what looks like a nose and a head and two eye sockets, which are symmetrical. Although they're dark, you can't really see in them. It's got the protuberance of a nose, and it's got the upper half of like a skull. But it can't possibly be a skull, because anything that was in the lunar environment for that long that was organic would have degraded, a long time ago. Even if it had only been there 30 or 40 years, it would have probably been degraded by now by the radiation bombardment. So then it has to be mechanical. And it was interesting because one of the things that I had not ever done, and I didn't realize there was even controversy about this, but apparently somebody's been charging that there's a very distinct obviously painted red stripe on the upper lip of this thing, as if the robot had a red stripe around its mouth. And, we don't know where the lower jaw of this thing is, but the upper part is a very distinct, very sharp, very clear red stripe. And apparently people have been claiming that that's not really there. And I think there are 4 photographs in a panorama that Harrison Schmitt took of Shorty Crater where this head-like object appears. And I went through and I downloaded one of them, and I started playing around with just the Windows photo enhancement stuff. If you go to Windows, if you click on an image, you can just right-click and go to Preview, then you can go to Edit, and you can adjust the color. And I just enhanced the color a little bit and played around with it, and I found that there is this bright red stripe that looks like it was literally painted on there. I mean, it's so exact and so precise, it looks like it was painted on the upper lip of this thing. And so you put all that stuff together, and I say, this is mechanical. And, I don't know where the rest of his body is. I don't know what happened. I don't know how it got there. I don't know if they brought it back. It's certainly the right size. It would have fit in one of the astronauts' helmets. So, it's definitely, in my opinion, flat out, it is a technological creation. It is absolutely something that somebody built. It is not a rock, and there's all those reasons why I believe that to be the case. And man, would I love to go there someday, and if it's still there, if they didn't bring it back, if it's still there, pick it up and take a look at it, because to me it's one of the most clear artifacts, and on a small scale, that I've ever seen. And I remember when I first saw it, I was at the infamous Richard C. Hoagland's house in Albuquerque. And he took me through picture after picture after picture, and he just put this thing up there, kind of a wide-angle shot. And And he wasn't talking about it, and I said, what's that thing there? And he said, what thing? I said, the head in the middle of the crater. And he goes, oh, it looks like a head to me. So, it's to me, it's quite amazing. And there's no denying that it's there. And people that say that we fooled around with the image enhancements, well, nonsense. I can reproduce what Richard did very accurately in about 10 minutes. So, and then anybody else with Windows could also do that. I don't even think you need Photoshop. I don't think my version, and my version, I believe, is in the color section of the book. I'd have to double check that. You don't even need Photoshop to do it. You can just use the basic color tools in Windows to bring this red stripe out. And to me, it's like that's the freakiest thing. Is wow. Yeah. Not only that, it's got paint on it. So if that doesn't tell you that it's art, it's machinery. I don't know what does.
Well, it's absolutely fascinating. Mike, I want to ask you, is there an underground city on the moon? And can you tell us about it?
Well, it's a really good question to which I do not have necessarily a great answer, except that there are places, and there are certainly places where it looks as though the skin of the moon has kind of been pulled apart, and underneath that you can see a lot of right-angle geometric structure, like bars or girders, structure, tubes, stuff like that. And the amazing thing was, and really, I think these are the last two images in Ancient Aliens on the Moon. They're the last two pictures that are in there, were when L-Cross, the recent L-Cross mission, fired this part of the spacecraft into the moon with the idea they were going to fire it into this crater, and it was going to create a plume. And then they were going to fly through the plume and analyze the material and hope that they would find water, I guess. And they dropped this thing in there, and there was no plume whatsoever. There was nothing. Nothing came up. It was like throwing a pebble into a tar pit. It just disappeared, right? It just sank. And that freaked NASA out, and so they spent a lot of time trying to find a picture of the plume. And they think, oh, well, here's a little bright spot. We think we found the plume. And then on their own enhancements, on NASA's own enhancements on the L-Cross stuff, you can see where the skin of the moon pulls apart, and underneath is all this right-angle geometric structure. It literally looks like, if you've ever seen the film Forbidden Planet, it literally looks like the inside of the Krell city from Forbidden Planet. And these are NASA's own enhancements. I mean, we didn't even touch these things. This is NASA stuff. So I think that there's definitely places where there's a lot of structure underground. And a lot of the stuff that we see is just some of the material that sort of, popped up from underneath. Maybe as the surface area has eroded away, or just you can find certain places where there are holes and openings. Because if this stuff has been abandoned as long as we think it has in many cases, meteors come along, the meteor shield eventually gets beaten down, and meteors make it through, and they create, they shatter stuff and make holes. I mean, there's some extraordinary stuff around the crater Copernicus where, it looks like stuff has been ripped apart and the skin's been pulled back, and you can see internal structure in the same way. So there's lots of pictures that indicate there's something underground in many places on the moon.
Mike, I want to just go back for a minute and talk about the glass structures again. You mentioned just before, talking with the infamous Richard, that these the glass structures possibly were created for, I guess, a meteor shield. How could glass be made to protect us or protect the moon from meteors?
Well, like I said, in a lunar environment, what makes glass shatter on Earth is the presence of moisture when the glass is formed. Moisture weakens it. So it's actually, if you have glass, if you have a pane of glass and you try to pull it apart, it doesn't pull very easily. It's pretty strong in tension. If you were to make a glass sphere, like a big glass globe, and that's also something that's pretty strong, if you stand on top of that, you can put hundreds of times its weight on it and it's not going to shatter. But if you hit it with a rock at an angle of about 90 degrees, glass is going to shatter. So it's got it's got very weak strength that way. So, however, that's caused by the moisture in it. And like I said, in the vacuum of space, lunar glass is actually about twice as strong as steel. And the moon is, it turns out, mostly glass. That's pretty much, it's glass, it's aluminum, it's titanium. Those are the primary materials present on the lunar surface itself. And there's even a proposal by NASA as part of the Bush 43 plan to return to the moon that we build protective structures out of lunar glass for exactly that reason, because they would be very, very strong, very, very lightweight. So in reality, given the situation on the moon, it's pretty much the ideal situation, the ideal material to be building a shield out of.
Okay, Mike, tell us about the connection between astronaut Alan Bean's painting and these glass-like structures. Do you think that Alan painted actually what was there, or do you think it's just an artistic interpretation?
No, I don't think it's artistic. I think it's an artistic interpretation of his subconscious, is what I think. Now, this is interesting because this is one of the conspiracies we got into in Dark Mission a little bit, and I really don't cover it too much in Ancient Aliens on the Moon, but it's an important aspect of this, because as you start to look at the pictures of the moon and you do some color enhancement or color exaggeration, sometimes I don't like the words enhancement, because essentially what you're doing is you're not altering the colors. You're simply turning up the volume on the color that's already there. And, you know, the impression that NASA has given us forever is that the moon is this bland, gray place with no color to it to speak of at all. And, in fact, if you look at these color images of the lunar surface and you do turn up the volume on the color, you expand the color a little bit, what you find is that there are these very strange color schemes. Soil is not gray. It's pink, and it's purple and blue and lavender and green and orange and all these different colors. And the question is that really what the lunar surface looks like, or is the color coming from overhead? And logically, if you had these titanic, towering, multi-pane glass structures that were layer upon layer upon layer, what happens is when light hits that, sunlight hits any sort of glass like that, it gets slowed down. It passes through these layers of this glass structure as if they were prisms. And when prisms happen, then, of course, you have shifts to the red or shifts to the, red end of the spectrum or the blue end of the spectrum. And then the colors mix together and make pinks and purples and blues and so forth. So that's why the lunar surface appears to be so weird. I mean, literally, the Apollo 17 area, the landing site there, there's pictures where some of the rocks look lavender, and then in the background the mountains are all pink. And this is all consistent with this idea of these towering glass structures. And then we have pictures from the surface of Apollo 17 that show these glass towers in the background, so it kind of all fits together. Now, Alan Bean was the fourth man to walk on the surface of the moon. He was an Apollo 12 astronaut, and he was there. Unfortunately, we don't have much video of Apollo 12 because Al Bean did the one thing he was trained not to do, which is he pointed the camera directly at the sun long enough to burn out the imager. So we don't really have much except a few photographs from the surface of Apollo 12. And I have my own thoughts on that. I think it's because Apollo 12 is the first time they really landed anywhere near some of these structures. I think Apollo 11 was purely symbolic. Get them there, let's have a Masonic ceremony and get them home kind of a thing. But that's a separate, conspiracy theory we can go into if you want later.
Right.
But Alan Bean was there, and he had his experiences on the moon, and he came back. And one of the things we discovered in Dark Mission, and I do not have confirmation for this, but one of the things we were told is, and this was literally at a cocktail party with somebody who was part of the debriefing of the astronauts, said, casually, all the astronauts were hypnotized to help them remember what they saw on the moon. And I thought, or help them forget, one of the two. But
right.
When Alan Bean got back, he flew one more mission. I think he flew a Skylab mission. And then he retired, went into private business, and he became an artist. And, of course, he started painting the moon. He started painting self-portraits of himself on the moon. And when he started, he painted them exactly like the official press release photographs look. It was him and his colleagues, in their astronaut suits, standing on the surface of the moon, and everything was dull, dull gray. It looked like some of the paint schemes for the modern paint schemes on some of the fighter jets. The guys in the Navy used to say the F-14 had a gray-on gray paint scheme that was called ugly and double ugly. So he kind of painted the moon ugly and double ugly. But apparently, according to him and some of the things that I've read about him in interviews, he said it just kind of bothered him. It didn't seem like quite right. So he started looking at ways to add more color to it. And he's saying that he did this because this was just a way of making it more visually interesting. But I think what's going on is that he doesn't consciously remember these colors necessarily. That there may be some block or something. It may have had something to do with hypnotism. It may not. But I suspect he doesn't consciously remember this, but in his subconscious mind, he remembered what the moon really looked like. And what he started doing is adding more and more color to these different self-portraits. And there's it's 4 different images, 4 different versions of the same painting. And when he finally gets to the one that satisfied him, that he decided this is the one that I like, it looks exactly like the surface images that have been color enhanced from Apollo 17 and Apollo 14 and Apollo 12 that show the lunar surface, the pink and lavender and deep purple and blue and green and all the different colors of the prismatic rainbow that you would expect, as if he had. Literally looks like there's the most famous image of this color stuff is the color enhancement Richard did of the panorama of Shorty Crater. Literally, his paintings look exactly like all the different bizarre colors in that, and I think that that's a reinforcement, not a proof, but a reinforcement of the argument and of the idea that that Bean did in fact see these same colors, and the only explanation for those colors really being there is not different chemical compositions in the soil; it's the glass stuff overhead creating this prismatic effect.
Well, we're fans of the show Ancient Aliens, and I have been convinced that there have been visitors from far away all throughout our history on Earth. So would you say that it's possible that these sites on the moon could have been the base camp for aliens that have visited the Earth?
Oh, yeah. That's the thing that's always really gotten to me the most is, whoever built these things, what were they doing there? They sure weren't up there just casually mining the moon. It can't have been that rich in materials that you can't get anywhere else. But they had to have, to my mind, they had to have been involved in some sort of complex, long-term project that had something to do with the planet Earth, because it is the place that you would go. If you were going to establish way stations to get back to where you came from, the moon would be a logical place to do that. And it would also give you a chance to observe what was going on the Earth, from a distance and be basically undetected until we got advanced to the point that we could start using telescopes and so forth. So, that's absolutely what I think this stuff is. I think a lot of it has to do with not just the moon, but it has to do with life on Earth. And, there's an interesting theory that is put forth primarily by Lloyd Pye and by a few other people that talks about the intervention theory of the development of life on Earth. That basically, the missing links are where somebody intervened. You call it God with a big G or the gods with a small g, but there are people who somehow came along and genetically intervened with life on Earth. And the place where you would probably experiment with some of that stuff before introducing it into the planet would be typically, logically, I think, the moon. That would be where you would bring your specimens, set up your laboratories, do your experimentations, and when you were satisfied you had something worth introducing into the environment, you would then do that and then sit back for maybe a million years and see how everything evolves. So, I think that's a fairly logical conclusion.
Now, Mike, our show is called Paranormal Review Radio, and so I just have to ask and get your opinion on this. What are your thoughts on the paranormal, and do you believe in ghosts and spirits?
Yeah, I do. I've had too many personal experiences to not believe that there is something bigger than us that is connected to us, that keeps us all connected, that puts people into our lives for a reason, that creates experiences for us for a reason. That's why I wrote The Choice, because I wanted to take what I knew about the scientific aspects that supported this idea, this connection to the hyperdimensional universe. In other words, the part of the universe that exists above this three-dimensional existence that we're in, and put that down and let people know that all these crazy New Age hippie type people and that believe in all this stuff, that you're not crazy, that there actually are scientific experiments that support these ideas and that they really do exist. Now, I personally have only ever had one UFO sighting of any kind, and that was in New York City last May. And
wow,
it was not. I don't think it was a structured craft. I think it was something almost energetic in composition. But I've had certainly enough. I guess you'd call it paranormal experiences to say that, yeah, I absolutely believe in this stuff. And I have a very close friend who's a psychic medium, and I'm 100% convinced that she can talk to my cats, because she does. And everything she tells me to do to deal with their behavior problems works. And I've used her advice, as kind of a life coach in some of my personal relationships, and she has been dead on. And I have another friend who's an outstanding numerologist who basically told me, this is going to happen. This, and this are going to happen. And, you can resist it to this point, but you're not going to be able to get past there. And, she always ends up being right in the end, which I hate her for sometimes. So, it's like, no, I really don't want to move here. I really don't want to go quit this job. But, it's one of these things where, yeah, there's some other big plan out there, and we're all connected to it. And I certainly have known friends. I know a lot of people that have some psychic ability, and they're very impressive in their, their capabilities, and they're just people that are a bit more sensitive to this vibrating environment that we all sort of flow through on a daily basis and don't even know it. I think we move through the paranormal ether probably as easily as we move through the air, three dimensions. We just don't know about it. So yeah, I'm a big believer, to tell you the truth.
Okay, cool. Well, you know what? I'm sure there's going to be a fourth book that you're going to write, because there's so much more to unveil.
In fact, I have to start that next week.
Oh, really?
Sorry, I have to start that next week, actually, yeah.
Can you give us any idea of what we can expect?
Well, I'll give you the title. It's Ancient Aliens on Mars. How does that work for you?
Oh, I love it.
That sounds
it'll be the
cool.
same. It'll be the same kind of thing where I take a lot of the stuff from Monuments of Mars and Dark Mission and other stuff that didn't make it into those two books because there just wasn't enough room, and put that together with some new stuff that's coming out. I don't know if anybody's noticed this, but where Curiosity has landed in Gale Crater, there's a pyramid there, which is basically looks like a pyramid, and is exactly the same size almost as the Great Pyramid at Giza. And there's other places that appear to be condos. And so there's going to be lots. There's going to be new stuff. There's going to be old stuff, because whenever you write a book, you've got to always assume that the audience has never heard of any of this, and you got to kind of bring them up to speed with, we didn't just start right here. We're not completely crazy. So this is all stuff. So yeah, Ancient Aliens on Mars is the next one. That'll be out next year, and then I'm sure there'll be some more coming along, as time goes by. But I do have other really exciting projects next year that are going to keep me busy. So I got to get this book done before the end of the year and get it in the can and get it ready to go.
Well, where can our listeners see you next, and where can they go to learn more about your work?
Well, next, you can see me on Ancient Aliens tonight, as a matter of fact. There's an episode on called Mysterious Places that I think is on right about now that I'm in. And I'm going to be in some more Season 5 episodes of that show.
Great.
The other thing is I don't really have any other speaking engagements between now and the end of the year, but you can go to my blog site, which is Mike Bara, that's with one R, B-A-R-A, mikebara.blogspot.com. And you can go there, and one of the things that's really cool there is there's a link to my Picasso web album. If you go to either the blog post or go to the Photos tab, there's a link to a web album where I have all of the pictures from ancient aliens on the moon in high resolution, because the truth is no matter how good the transfer process is, you always lose something when you convert to print. So people will be able to see the real details on some of the images that I talk about in the book there. You can also connect with me on Facebook. I think I'm loaded up on personal friends. I think I've reached the limit of 5,000, but I also have a Mike Bara author fan page, so you can go in and do that. And I pretty much anything to do with the book or things like that or appearances, I cross-reference to both of those sites. You can follow me on Twitter. I'm Mike Bara 33 on Twitter, just to mess with people conspiracy-wise. I put the 33 in there. And I also have a YouTube channel. So I've got lots of videos there. I just put up my comedic appearance at the Conscious Life Expo this last Saturday, which may get me banned from Coast to Coast AM forever because I made so much fun of George. But anyway, it was really fun. I made fun of George. I made fun of Richard. I made fun of Giorgio. And probably none of them will ever speak to me again. But it was really fun. And you can connect with me through all the social media: Twitter, Facebook, YouTube. And one of the things I got to apologize to people for is I would like to do a lot more YouTube videos, but I just don't. I'm so busy I don't have enough time to do that. However, I do promise in the following year that I'll try to do more YouTube videos and get more videos of lectures and things up on the web for people to watch, people who don't have a chance to come and see maybe some of the live lectures.
Oh, that's great.
Well, that's awesome. You know what, Mike, we do want to thank you for such a great interview and for agreeing to come on the show. It really has been fun having you on. We'll be sure to look out for more on Mike Bara, and we wish you the best of luck. And, Mike, our door is always open, and we'd love to have you back on. So thank you so much.
Okay. I'd love to come back, so thank you very much for having me.
That would be awesome. The door is open. So thank you so much, and have a great night.
Thanks, Mike. Thank you so much.
Okay, bye-bye, guys.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Well, I mean, his book is called Ancient Aliens on the Moon. That was Mike Bara. And you can get his book on Amazon.com. And actually, I believe it just came on Kindle last week. I think it was last week or the week before. So if you are able to get his book, it's I think it's only $11 and change on Kindle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was pretty inexpensive.
Yeah, and it's a really great book. It's a really great read. I know, Lucy, you finished the entire book. I got about 3/4 of the way through. And he's got some great pictures in there. I mean, just the full gallery of what he was talking about and of the glass structures and the domes and these images that were on the moon that he's picked out. And it's just a great read, just something to have. And I actually have his other book, Dark Mission, The Secret History of NASA, which is mind-blowing to me. So just check him out. Check out Mike Bara's books. His books are amazing. He sort of branches off more than what you see on the History Channel, on the Ancient Alien show on the History Channel, and he goes more in depth in his books. So you don't get everything that what Mike is all about on the History Channel. So I recommend his books. He's a great author, and I was happy to actually be able to get him on the show.
Well, you know what? UFOs and all this is your subject. And like I did say, this is relatively new to me. But you know what? I actually finished that book in one night. I know. It's just amazing to me. And, he really writes it where you just can't put it down. So, I highly, highly recommend reading his books. I want to read Dark Mission.
And it's a great book. Before we did radio, I have to admit, I wasn't an avid reader. I would do a lot of reading from online or watching, television shows or watching YouTube channels. And, it is amazing to actually read the book. When you hear about it and you read about it online, or you are watching a show about someone who has written a book, you think you get the idea. You think you get the gist of it. You really don't. And it wasn't until we started to do the show that every time we'd have a guest on, we'd make it a point to get the book and read it prior to the guest coming on. And it's just amazing to learn more about what's posted online or said about on television that they actually have inside their books and in their literature. It's just amazing. So I highly recommend getting the book.
Well, he mentioned earlier, like the younger viewers, most of them are just like YouTube and watching things online, and to actually pick up a book and to actually get a little bit deeper into it. I've always been a reader. I've always read at least maybe 2 to 3 books a week, and just doing the show has just increased my range of what I'm reading. It's not just Twilight. Now it's Ancient Aliens on the Moon. So
it's not the gamer magazines anymore, right?
No. But you really should pick up the book. I mean, this was absolutely fascinating. And when you read some of the stuff that he talks about, like the Brookings Report and other things like that, and about NASA, it really does make you think, and some of it is a little bit disturbing. I mean, it really is when you think about what we're not getting from, the government. But that's a whole other show.
Lucy, are you shaking your head? Because I
yes,
can hear
I
tapping.
am. I'm sorry. My earrings hurt. I was going to take them off, but I didn't want to make noise.
Those darn earrings.
Okay. Shall we move on to some business?
Yeah. Do we have some time? Did you want to talk a little bit about next week?
Yes, I do.
All right. So for those of you who may not have been with us since the very beginning of our airtime, whatever you want to call it, of being on the radio, on online radio, next week is actually marking our 1-year anniversary. So right off the bat, I just want to say, Lucy, happy anniversary to you.
Happy anniversary.
I can't believe that it's been a year already now that we've been on the air and doing this. And, I want to thank all of our listeners out there who have been with us for such a long time. Like Connie's been there, actually, I think, from the second show, maybe the second or third show that we've been on, and that was back in October of 2011. So Connie's our vested listener. So thank you, Connie. And I know that there's others out there also, too, and Mateo's been there also, and I don't know where he went. He's not in chat anymore. But,
no, he left a bit early.
Yeah, he left early. Something must have happened. Maybe he's going to get another bottle of brandy. But, so next week we're going to do a little bit of celebrating. We do have a guest on, and Lucy's going to get to that later. But after the guest, we're going to go down memory lane. And I mentioned to Lucy before we went on the air tonight that I thought of doing something that could possibly just be fun. And I think, Lucy, if you don't want to do this, you don't have to. But I thought it would be cool if we sort of, well, two things. What I thought about was interviewing each other, and then that'll get good, right? And then I thought maybe we just open up the phone lines to our listeners and have them interview us. Here we are every Friday interviewing, the guests and folks that we have on the air. why not give them a shot or give them a chance to get to know us if they want? Not that we live these exciting lives, but we'll open up the forum and have people call in. It could be paranormal, it could be about us, personally, whatever it is. But I thought that it would be really cool, and I've got some really good questions to ask you, Lucy.
Oh my God! I think this is either going to be really a whole lot of fun, or this is going to be very.
It's going to go horribly wrong. We're going to have.
Go
ahead,
have
Lucy.
One thing, okay?
Yeah.
It has been a year, and you know what? I really have to acknowledge the fact that this show would have never happened if it wasn't for you. I originally had the idea to go on air and do a radio show, and it went horribly, horribly wrong. And you were my knight in shining armor that came through, and because of you, this show happened, and it has been so much fun, and I can't thank you enough that we're here. It's been a whole year, and it went by so fast. I mean, every week just gets better and better.
Well, thank you, and the same with you. If you didn't have that passion for it, I don't think you. I needed that drive. I've always said, as in my 20s and early 30s, I would always say I'd love to do radio. I'd love to do radio, but I never thought that there was an outlet for me to do that until you started talking about it, and we did some research. And yeah, we do have a story which we'll probably share next week, I think, Lucy, of the mishap that happened the first time we tried to be on the air with other folks, and what led to what everybody's listening to right now. And I feel like sort of just getting everything out there and letting everybody know what our story is and how it happened. I think that the listeners would be interested. I like connecting with everybody, not just on a paranormal level, but, just informing everybody of who we are and what we are. We learn a lot about folks that are listening and who've become very close to us, like Noah and Connie and Nell, and Sharon and Paranormal and Terry. We've talked to, and many more other folks that we've talked to not only on Facebook but via Messenger or email, and we've sort of learned about each other, personal lives and their work lives and their ambitions, and so maybe we haven't been, I guess, forthcoming with who we are, because we're on the air and we're here to sort of present the guest at the moment. And we rarely ever get personal, so maybe next week we'll get that. Maybe that's some of the questions that I'm going to ask you, Lucy.
Oh God!
So make sure you break out that almond champagne because you're probably going to need it.
Oh, I can't wait for this. Actually, no, I think it's going to be fun. I really do. I mean, I'm just so happy that it's been a year, and I'm telling you, for everybody out there, it's just going to get better. We try to get guests and topics that we know we would like to talk about and that you would like to talk about. This show's not about us, talking about ourselves, except next week will be the one time that you'll get to hear us talk about ourselves. But basically what we're doing here is for everybody out there. If we bring a guest on, we want you to learn about the guest. And these questions that we're asking, we're just as interested as you are. So the guests the guests and the topics that we touch, we're assuming that these are the things that you want to hear. And like I said, this whole radio show is just so much fun. I mean, I've dabbled in radio for quite a while, just here and there, here in Chicago, but this is completely different. This is, at times, it's scary. At other times, it's the most fun thing that I do all week. So I think next week is going to be absolutely awesome, and I can't wait.
Yeah, we're going to go down memory lane. We're going to go back to past shows and maybe do some updates on some of the guests that we've had, or revisit some of the things that we've encountered on doing the show and being on air. I know, Lucy, you just listened to our first show, and I just did actually today, and I could not stop laughing. How hysterical it was. But, we all learn, and we all move on. We're not perfect, and I don't think we're perfect now. But it was pretty cool to see where we came from and where we've ended up. And, it's not just us. It's the guests that we've had and our listeners who've made us this way. So, next week is sort of, paying homage to everybody out there listening. We have... we've had a lot of fans, and we've gained, and actually, and we'll get into this next week, but we've sort of peaked at one point, I think it was like maybe 4 or 5 months ago, and tremendous amount of listeners. I mean, people don't realize that, even just looking right now in the chat, it says 14 people, 13 people. That's actually not the true number at all. We have so many listeners, and we're so grateful for them that they listen not just through Blog Talk, but they go through iTunes, and then there's these other platforms that are out there that I don't even know about, of how they can actually listen live and then in archive. So we're going to go down memory lane and talk about some of the shows that we've had. And one of my I'll give you guys a little hint, and Lucy's going to probably kill me for saying this right now. But one of the questions that I'm going to have, not questions, but one of the things that I want to bring up is what Lucy says all the time. Lucy tends to say this same phrase every show. And, Lucy, when I was sort of looking back today and listening to some of the shows, I listened to 4 of them, and 3 of them you've said it, and you just said it maybe about 5 minutes ago, again, the same phrase. It's hysterical.
Are you going to count every time how many times I've said it?
You know what I should do? I should actually put an audio clip together, and I should download all those sayings and phrases from all the shows, because it's the same. It's 3 words that you say in a row constantly. I should make a little audio clip. I know you're going to kill me.
Yes, I am.
Okay.
Well, one of the things that we've done. Oh God, this is going to be very interesting. So you really don't want to miss this.
All right.
Okay. Nell is telling you to go ahead and do it.
Of course she is. And Nell, okay, she knows my name today.
Yeah,
not
next
Jonathan.
Week it's by my co-host Jonathan.
Yeah. We love you, Nell. All right, Lucy, you want to get into the Fan of the Week?
Yes, and one of the things that we've done, and one of the things that really has become a very important part of this show, is the Paranormal Review Radio Fan of the Week. And this week, we've got a very special fan, and I'm trying to see, I don't think they are here.
No, I don't see her there.
But this lady is a very special lady. She is one of our fans. She's always posting. She has some really she's a very wonderful, nice lady. And
she's gone through some of the same chaos that we have and certain other folks have gone through. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, it's true. I mean, I think next week when we talk about it, I think some of the things that we've gone through, I think a lot of people have gone through, and Susan has definitely gone through some of this. The Paranormal Radio Review Fan of the Week is Susan Jackson. She's from Gatlinburg, Tennessee. She's the founder and the lead investigator of Zero Gravity Paranormal. And just a few little likes about Susan. She likes Leonard Skinner. She likes Journey, H.P. Lovecraft. This is awesome. I can tell she's a brilliant woman. She loves the Twilight series. She likes Chuck Norris, and she likes Paranormal Review Radio. Congratulations, Susan. Thank you so much for being a fan, and we love you.
Thanks, Susan. You're great.
Well, there you have it. Hopefully this show made you think, or at least wonder about what's really up there on that big, beautiful ball in the sky that we call the moon. Now, whether you believe it or not, More and more discoveries, both on Earth and on the moon, point towards one thing. We may not be alone. So I want to steal a line from the X-Files. The truth is out there. We want to thank you. We want to thank Mike Bara for joining us tonight, and we cannot wait for his next thought-provoking book. So let's talk about not being alone for a minute. So many of us have experienced contact with the other side. It is what drives us as paranormal investigators. Some of us have experiences that are almost too frightening to tell, but we still do. Well, A&E Bio has taken some of these stories and put them together with some actual footage and the accounts from the people who lived through them. My Ghost Story is the highest-rated series on A&E Bio channel. Mark Phillips is the executive producer of the show, and he's going to be joining us next week to share some of the true stories that make this show a must-see for anyone who's interested in the paranormal. So, if you think that's awesome, like Anthony talked about, next week is going to be very special for all of you and very, very special for us. On October 21st, 2011, Paranormal Review Radio went on the air with its first show ever. Like I said before, it's been a wonderful, fun, and amazing year. Next Friday night, join us, please, as we look back on the first year. It's the one-year anniversary show. We're going to look at some of the highlights, some of the funny moments, and yes, Anthony, we'll go over my screw-ups too, okay? So, everybody, please, please make sure you join us next Friday night for this very special show. Thank you to all of you out there for being the best fans on this planet. All of you, you all rock. Anthony, thank you so much for being the best co-host in the world. So until next Friday night, dear friends, have a paranormal week, everyone, and good night.
Good night, everybody.
Paranormal